everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today for one of our weekly AT&T focused webinars. My name is Sam, and I'll be moderating this presentation. In just a second, we'll be joined by Patrick Ray. Patrick is one of our AT&T focused advisors, and he is going to be covering some of the things that go along with the emotional aspect of investing, especially as it comes with retirement. Before he comes on, I'd like to very quickly remind you we are not affiliated nor endorsed whatsoever by AT&T. We are a completely independent group of financial advisors here, so please keep that in mind as you're listening along. If you stick around after this presentation, Patrick will also be answering some questions. If we don't have time to get to them all, I apologize in advance. He will answer as many as he can, time permitted, of course, and what he does not get to, I will make sure another AT&T focused advisor addresses with you either over the phone or through email after the presentation. Throughout the presentation, I will be entering some links. They will guide you to our AT&T focused retirement guide, as well as our complimentary cash flow analysis. You can book an appointment to have that run with one of our advisors and get started on your retirement planning journey. And with that, let's just jump right into the content with Patrick Ray.
Hello, everyone. Thanks, Sam, and we appreciate your attention this afternoon. My name is Patrick Ray, as Sam had mentioned, and boy, I guess the topic that we have to cover today might be the most timely of things that we've talked about in recent memory from my perspective, which is correlated to one of the most common questions that we get in this time frame, or at least in this given year, because we have an election year. And typically, September is also a fairly volatile month for the equity markets. They usually are negative from a historical perspective, and so it brings a lot of conflicting thoughts on what, if anything, they should be doing differently than they were doing before on their retirement planning and so forth. And so we're going to talk about some important items that we feel are necessary in an effort for you to prepare and plan for one of the most important financial decisions that you ever have to plan for. So we're going to talk about a retirement planning checklist. We're going to talk and discuss a little bit about the two different theories of finance, which are important with respect to what we have to cover today. And then we're going to discuss a little bit about the behavioral characteristics that can often lead to inappropriate or untimely decisions with respect to what you're doing to try to meet your overall goals and objectives. We're going to discuss a little bit about what the impacts and effects are on inflation with respect to our goals. And then we're going to talk a little bit about what we discuss with our prospects and clients to help them and encourage them to keep their goals and so forth in mind. So from my standpoint, I'm 24 years in to the planning process for helping clients retire from Fortune 100 companies. And as basic as it may be, this may be one of the most critical pieces of putting together a plan, which is to have a checklist that details and outlines the things that are going to be or need to be addressed, in our opinion, as to what it's going to look like when you transition off the payroll and into retirement. Because let's face it, you typically only do that one time, right? So harnessing your emotions on this transition might be the most important part to this whole process. And sometimes there is a business or a financial planning aspect of a decision that needs to be made, and it's imperative that you remove your emotions from that particular decision. So, for example, many of our clients that retire from a company that has a pension, and there's timing considerations as to when they can collect their pension because how the interest rate is calculated for that. So we can't be emotionally attached to the volatility of what's happening in the markets, for example, if we're trying to make the most impactful and best decision on when it's best for us to walk off the payroll with the most money from a pension perspective. And so that's just one of many examples regarding this particular part and topic of the checklist. From a volatility perspective, it's really important that you understand that there's going to be volatility when you're retired. Well, let me repeat that. There will be volatility when you're retired. So for this thought process of like all of the things that are impacting stock market returns and what's happening in the economic condition and so forth are only correlated to when you're working is completely false. It's going to change. The volatility is going to be there and the markets are going to change when you're retired. And so the catch to this particular part of the checklist is to decrease the risk that's associated with that and how that means or what that means as a role on your income as a big picture, right? And what it means to your balances over the long term. So that's certainly part of the checklist that we feel is important. Increasing retirement income is a given as far as like that's something that everyone wishes to do. And of course, your income is often correlated to what you've put in as far as work to accumulate a amount of capital that you're comfortable living off of. And sometimes the reason that people put decisions to retire off is because that pool of capital is not big enough to support what's important to them. And so this is clearly a topic that needs to be addressed from a checklist perspective. And then from a taxes and penalties perspective, this is kind of two-sided because sometimes there's penalties that are correlated to your pension plan if you have one of them with respect to the company you work for. And then everyone wants to pay as little as humanly possible with respect to taxes, but it's hard to do or it's hard to plan for when 100% of what you're going to rely on from an income perspective is taxable income to you because it's coming from a qualified source like a pension plan or a 401k savings plan. So this is often a very volatile topic per se with respect to sometimes it's very easy to manage for some people and then it's very difficult to manage for others. And so we feel like because of this, it's important to put on the checklist. And then having a plan might be the next best, most important thing next to emotions, in my opinion, on how you can react or potentially stay the course based on your goals and objectives with what's happening in a volatile or a time frame that seems to have a bunch of things happening to it. Sometimes they're negative, sometimes they're positive, and sometimes we don't know what, if anything, we should do in an effort to take that information and react or make adjustments in our portfolio. And so when we talk about the income phase of your retirement, you're going from an accumulation phase to an income phase, right? And so the sources of what you rely on is pretty important. And typically there are three of the main ones, which is your Social Security, your pension in the event that you have one, and the 401k savings plan that you have. And so we call this our three-legged income stool. And with respect to this, this is where we want to effectively manage and maximize each third of this given pool, which is correlated to all these different variables and emotions that we have. Like, should you take your Social Security at 62 versus 65 or 67? Should you leave with age penalties on your pension plan because it's better for you to retire in an interest rate environment today as opposed to a rising interest rate environment that might happen 2 or 3 or 4 years down the road? How much money do you have in your 401k? Does your 401k have after-tax funds in it where you could consider potentially moving those into a Roth IRA to grow tax-free for the rest of your life? Many of the decisions and things that we talk to our people about for the planning process, and something that often goes overlooked and some things that we feel aren't talked about, one of which is the theories of finance and how these matter with respect to the thought process that's involved on what to do with your retirement plans. And so there's a standard theory of this and there's a behavioral theory of this. And so from a standard theory of finance perspective, on the investor side, this is where we're being completely rational with respect to our purchasing decisions. We have all the information that's necessary and we assess, the meaning of its correlation to what we're trying to accomplish, and it's 100% accurate, okay? From a market's perspective, these are quickly known to incorporate all the information, and therefore it represents the true value of a particular stock that you're trying to purchase. And so on the standard side, this seems pretty vanilla for most of us, right? It's a very black and white oriented thought process where there's no misinformation here. It's very clear cut, and we know exactly what to expect from all of the decisions that are involved in what we're trying to accomplish. And where it gets a little murky, if you will, is the behavioral side of things, where we are not robots. And in general, we add in an aspect of being irrational because our emotions are attached to this. And so from an investor's perspective on the behavioral side, we're talking about where we're not being rational for our investment decisions and our financial purchases. And we often act on imperfect information. And typically it's correlated to your emotions that are driving the need to buy a new car when you technically don't need a new car. And if that's the best financial decision for you to make, as an example. And on the market side, it's really difficult if the markets were incorporating behavioral information to relate to the true value of the security that you're thinking about purchasing and how that's able to be purchased and beat over the long term. So in other words, if we're trying to outpace the markets and still assess your need for income and your tolerance for risk and your financial goals and your overall objectives. The question is, how do we do that if the markets are using this behavioral characteristic on the financial part of things? And so there's anomalies that are involved. There are offsets, change happens, volatility occurs. And so today, really, our focus is trying to stay in check and in tune with what's important to you and your family and your household, and how to incorporate those things into the decisions that you need to make to be prudent and to make important beneficial decisions for your family, as it turns out. So from a behavioral characteristic, if you understand how your emotions play a role in sometimes making these decisions on purchases or from a retirement perspective, a lot of things are more clear, and as they should be. For example, if you are one of those people that have a pension and it's important for you to calculate not only the value of your pension, but what it means to determine a specific retirement date because of how the interest rates play a role in your decision, then understanding this from a behavioral characteristic will give you the best day to retire. We can remove the emotions, and we know, given data and fact, that it's best for you to retire at this time. Developing an investment strategy is also quite important. And if you don't have something called an investment policy statement, I encourage you to ask about one or to get one, and because it clearly defines the role that your investments and the capital that you've worked and saved and accumulated over your lifetime plays as it repeats itself over time in an effort to produce the maximum amount of income with the least amount of risk. And then hopefully these things are the best for you to ultimately take away the best investor experience. And so part of the biggest hurdle that we have is communication to the clients to ensure that these are all things that are kept in check. And in other words, we want you to have the most favorable experience possible when it comes time to implementing these strategies. And so it's imperative for us to communicate those things to you so that, in fact, your experience is as good as it can be, for sure. So from the behavioral side of things, to give you an idea on some of the terms that are used when we're speaking of things like this, it's things like loss aversion and anchoring and mental accounting. Diversification is one of those things. The disposition effect, hurting, regret, media response, optimism. These are all things that are part of the behavioral characteristic side of things. And we're going to look at a couple of specifics. One of them is the hurting mentality. And you must already know if you haven't done some homework, but it's important that you do if you don't know this, which is the performance that has happened in the past has nothing to do with what happens in the future, right? And so this slide talks about the benefits of picking what is referred to as a 5-star Morningstar rated fund, which is Morningstar is a system that rates mutual funds. And so if you went out to buy the best, what they perceive to be the best 5-star rated funds, in a 3-year window of time, only 14% of those have remained at a 5-star level. And when you start lengthening out the time, the number of how many of the percent of the originals of the 5-star funds that were picked continues to go down and down and down. And so the moral of this story is that past results do not provide future performance or guarantees. And so the significance of that is we cannot look backwards and say, this is what we should be doing. And I can't tell you the countless times that I see investment proposals and things that people have been shown that can expect that because the stock market did 11.2% over this given window of time, that that's what they should expect in their retirement portfolio. Most of you in this particular example would not be comfortable having your investments at risk because they don't align with your investment goals or your retirement objectives. And so because you don't want the volatility, it's going to be tough for you to earn 11.2% in your portfolio while removing money on an annual basis to live off of. And so we can't look in the past and say that's what we should be doing. And so all of our suggestions should be correlated for sure to your investment goals and your tolerance for risk and your need for income and your financial objectives and what's important overall to your household. Loss aversion is another one of these things. This is a way we measure risk, or one of the ways anyway. And most people are uncomfortable taking risk unless they can earn 2 to 2.5 times what they put at risk to make an investment. So, for example, if you're going to play a choice to put $10,000 in the stock market for some reason, you're going to want to expect at least $20,000 as a return. And what this just simply outlines is that people do not like to lose money. Okay, and so that's a given, right? I think it's very easy to say no one is encompassing that in their plan. We don't want to lose money in any case. But the key to understanding these behavioral characteristic things is part of what I mentioned at the very beginning, which is market downturns, which are going to be part of your retirement cycle after you work, after you retire, and once you're in retirement and pulling income from your portfolios and seeing the stock market go up and down on a fairly normal and regular basis. And so this is a interesting slide that kind of takes back 60 years of the average of the duration of the markets going up, which on average is 51 months during this 60-year window of time, at 151.6% as a net gain, versus the 34.2% on an average of 11.1 months where the stock market is down or is negative. And so I think the thing that is probably most important in this slide is think in terms of these orange representations, and those are still the months where you need to pay the bills. You need to continue to pull money from your retirement accounts while your investments are down by 10 or 15 or 20% or more. And I'll tell you, this happens often, which is when we have a volatile time window, especially in things that when people are concerned about, for example, an election year or what's happening with the interest rate environment or what's happening overseas, many of these things that we can't control, they think in terms of what action that they could or should take in an effort to prepare themselves for these things. And I think our best advice in the grand scheme of things is that if you feel the need to make a change in your plans because of a given activity of what occurred in the market, good or bad, mostly they're bad, but if this happens to you and you feel the need to go into your 401k, for example, and take out a certain amount of money in a given area and move it to a bond or a stable value type fund, then my recommendation is for you to do a risk analysis on that portfolio immediately. And it's because it's likely that those investments are set up far too aggressive for your liking. And it's easy to see things are great and normal and well when the stock market goes up, right? This is an exercise for what happens when the stock market goes down. And so I encourage you to take an action on your part to understand where your actual risk is in your portfolio and compare that to an exercise of taking a risk assessment of some sort so that you understand how you should have your investments managed and ensure that, in fact, they are invested as such. And so this will help you with this market downturns and the cycle of what happens in the economic condition even after you are retired. So on an inflationary scenario, which we talked about at the beginning that we were going to discuss, we have been through a really recent inflationary environment where we're paying quite a bit more for our goods and services today than we were in the most recent 3 to 5 years, for example. But the catch is that often people think when this happens that the move, because of this volatility and the potential decline of the stock markets and a potential recession, as an example, is to move their money into fixed income assets. And what's interesting is most people don't understand how the fixed interest rates are correlated to fixed income investments. And so, in other words, these two things often don't work in tune with one another in an environment where you have rising interest rates. And that's typically because when you move your money to bonds and bond prices decline, you're losing capital. And that's one of the primary things that we're trying to avoid from a retirement perspective. And so what most people have a misunderstanding about is the correlation between stocks and bonds and how those interact with either a rising or a reducing or a lowering interest rate type environment. And so those are all important things that we ask, that we talk to our people about. And so typically our advice in a grand general sense is to stick with a long-term strategy, right? If your goals haven't changed from one day to the next, there's no reason for you to go into your 401k and remove 25% of the equity markets because you think the election is going to have an impact on the markets. I assure you, it's probably certain that the election is going to have some sort of impact on the markets, whether it goes up or down. But it's either going to go up or it's going to go down. And the more important takeaway is to ensure that if it goes down to the extent that you're comfortable with, meaning that if it goes down too far, then it's likely that your investments are set up too aggressively for your liking and for your overall investment goals and your overall investment objectives, which ties into turning off your TV, if that's even possible in today's world, which is something correlated to the media response. That was one of the behavioral characteristics that I read off among many. And a lot of times we feel like there's a need to act or react to your portfolio because something happens or something is said or talked about on the television, and it comes in the news, and it comes to us in many formats, right? Because of the social media involvement in today's society. And so be careful about taking that as a tool in an effort to implement a new strategy in your portfolio that may not be consistent with your overall goals. And so that leads to not reacting or not feeling the need to react to every bit of information that you hear, because oftentimes it's information that's already transpired and it's too late to respond to begin with, or it's not part of what's important to your household as a whole. So either way, it's typically a losing proposition if we're not trying to stick with a long-term strategy that's consistent with what's important to you in the grand scheme of things. Questions to ask your advisor. If you haven't already done this and you're looking for a partner in retirement, some things to know are things to ask the people that you would interview and talk to as a potential partner to work with. And so one of the things you want to know is if they do cash flow analysis, and if they do them, if they're charging you. We offer a complimentary cash flow analysis as a way to introduce our services to people, to try to connect with those that we feel could use our help and that are looking for help, and then talk to them about the benefits that we bring to the table so that they have some kind of understanding of what the relationship is going to be like. And of course, there's fees involved. We do not work for free, no different than you work for free. So the most important part is so that those fees are transparent and they're disclosed to you so that you understand what you could expect. And maybe the biggest takeaway from your standpoint is, what value do they bring to the table to you? Is it the communication? Is it the constant portfolio management? Is it the return that you're getting? Is it the avoidance of a ton of downturn when the markets are changing because you're pulling money out of your accounts? I mean, there's a myriad of things that might differ from household to household. And so you might just ask yourself, what's the takeaway for you, and what kind of value do they bring to the table for you and your family? So we know statistically that 74% of people over the age of 50 do not have a written financial plan. And frankly, there's no excuse for it, because many firms, certainly ours, use this as a tool in an effort to introduce what they do for a living and help you understand how they may correlate to your plans and how you might benefit from a relationship with an advisory firm similar to ours. And so because even though the large percentage of people over the age of 50 don't have a written financial plan, that should not be you, because we're happy to do one of these analyses for you as a way to introduce our services to you. So why the retirement group? Well, we've been around for a long time, and we have a ton of experience in helping people transition from employees to retirees that work for Fortune 100 companies. And we have offices across the country. And so our knowledge goes specific with the plans that we're accustomed to working with over the years for your savings and your pension and your medical plans and so forth. And so I mentioned the complimentary analysis that we obviously do, that I mentioned as a way to chat with us and see if there's a fit, because that's what we're looking to accomplish in the event that you're open to that. And so if you're not already following us on LinkedIn, we have company-specific LinkedIn pages that might be helpful to you in case you work for one of these firms or companies, that you can follow up the updates and news that we put out on a regular basis that's specific to just those firms themselves. And if you want to reach out to us, you can do that in a number of ways. Okay, you can info@theretirementgroup.com. Email us with any questions that you might have, or specifics on when you might want to talk with an advisor who might be in your local area to catch up and see if there might be a fit. You can call our 800 number, which is 800-900-5867. That's another way to get a hold of us, obviously. You can schedule a meeting with taking a picture of the QR code to the left, and it will give you access to a calendar where you can pick a convenient time to be aligned with an advisor that can answer your questions there. And again, here's a picture of this QR code to take advantage of if you're not following us on LinkedIn, because obviously that's a place for us to follow up with folks and give them data that's correlated to their company that might be applicable to you specifically. And so from a big picture perspective, we are here to help, right? And so what I want to do is turn the meeting back over to Sam to see if we have any questions before I let you go for the afternoon, and see if we can do some help for some folks. Sam?
Thank you, Patrick. Yeah, we're just going to answer a couple questions. As a reminder, that complimentary cash flow analysis, the link to book one of those is in the chat box, so please take advantage of that, as well as the calendar link to book an appointment directly with Patrick. Alrighty, Patrick, we're just going to answer two. Are you ready?
Yes, ma'am.
Alrighty. Number one, I'm worried if I retire now, I might get bored or feel unproductive. How do people emotionally adjust to the sudden shift from working full time to not working at all?
Ooh, good question. I'll be honest, I've seen this hold up retirements, not because people could financially afford to retire, which they could, but they don't have any idea what they're going to do when they retire. And so this is part of, frankly, this should be on our checklist, to be honest with you, as to just thinking in terms of what you might enjoy doing when you're no longer working, because all of a sudden, there's quite a bit of time on your hands that you used to dedicate to the company that you work for, and now you're trying to transition into retirement. And it's tough, to be honest with you, if you don't have a hobby or if you don't have family that lives either close or somewhere that you can visit with on a regular basis, like grandchildren or great grandchildren. And maybe it's not even an interest of yours to travel on the grand scheme of things. And so this is a tough question, but some of the things that I have seen work are for those people who are thinking about retiring. They have certain things that they enjoy doing, right? Like gardening, or they play golf, or they like to read, or whatever. So if you're one of these individuals that can kind of outline what is important to you, or kind of how you envision retirement looking for yourself, you might say to yourself, okay, if you garden, I have some people who work at one works at a local nursery, one works at Home Depot, and they work in the garden department, and they just do it as a way to keep them mentally stimulated and checked in. And it also happens to be something that they enjoy doing. So that's a way you get to interact with people. It keeps you on your toes. You still have to report technically for work, I guess. But you're not going to work in those cases because you need the income. You're doing that because it solves a dilemma for you on when you ultimately retire and have this off time, what you would do with some of that off time. So it keeps you checked in mentally, and it does happen to put a few bucks in your pocket, which also is nice. Another example is I've got several clients who are big golfers, and they work at a golf course, and they either do stuff in the clubhouse, or they pick up golf balls at the range, or they do marshalling or whatever, and it allows them to play golf for free. So it has an ancillary monetary or financial benefit where maybe they're not paying as much for golf to enjoy their time off. So those are just a couple of examples. But yeah, this is a tough question, and I encourage you, if you hadn't thought about this, put this on your checklist as one of the things to kind of think in terms of what you're envisioning retirement looking like for yourself.
Somehow I feel like even if you're golfing for free, your paycheck would still end up going right back to that golf course if you worked at a golf course. All righty, thank you. Last one. When I see my friends making different investment moves, I start to doubt my own strategy. How can I stay emotionally grounded and trust my own plan?
Oh, this is really important. And the last part of your statement is the statement, which is to have a plan. And the crucial part of this is to ensure, especially if you're looking for a partner in retirement, that your advisory firm is crystal clear on what's important to you, right? And so this often negates a lot of concern for the need to feel like you're reacting to a certain thing that's happening in the market, or what your friends are doing, and so forth. And I would be incredibly careful about that, because everyone is different, right? The move of someone selling a stock or a investment might have nothing to do with the actual risk that they're taking in the stock market. It's because they need to pay off a credit card that they're not telling you they owe, or they need to withdraw more money because they're spending more money than they otherwise planned on when they ultimately retire. So the key is to have a plan. Make sure that you react on the plan, and don't veer off the roadmap of what the plan presents to you and your family. That's my best advice.
That's great advice. Thank you, Patrick. Alrighty, that is it for today. Do you have anything else you wanted to add before we go?
Hmm.
Okay.
No, hopefully you found some value in spending some time with us this afternoon. Thank you very much for your time. We covered quite a bit on the movement and volatility of what's happening in the markets and how that may affect your retirement decisions. And so please feel free to reach out to us in the event that you have specific questions or concerns about your circumstance, and we're delighted to help. So thanks for attending.
Thank you, everybody, for being here. And thank you, Patrick. Have a good day.
Take care.